The voicemails were organized by date. That was the part that kept eating at me, even weeks later, even after everything had already burned to the ground. Not that they existed. Not that she'd kept them. But that she had organized them. Labeled them. Stored them in a password-protected folder on her phone while our wedding video 4 hours of the best day of my life, the day I married Claire and Whitfield and became the happiest fool in the state of Georgia, had been deleted so thoroughly that even the cloud backup was gone. I know this because I went looking for it on a Tuesday night in March, 3 weeks after her birthday dinner. I wanted to show her mother something. A clip of Claire laughing during our first dance, this unguarded, beautiful sound she made when I stepped on her foot and then bowed like I'd done it on purpose. I wanted to show Diane that clip because Diane had been sick, the kind of sick that makes you want to pull out every good memory you own and hold it up to the light. So I went looking, and it wasn't there. I thought it was a syncing error. I thought maybe the file had corrupted. I spent 40 minutes troubleshooting before I called the videographer, a guy named Pete who'd shot weddings in Savannah for 20 years, and Pete told me, after a long pause, that he'd received a deletion request for our footage 14 months ago. Someone had contacted him through the client portal using Claire's login credentials and requested that all raw and edited footage be permanently removed. Pete said he'd sent a confirmation email to the address on file. He said he was sorry. The address on file was Claire's. I sat in our home office with Pete's voice still in my ear and I looked at the framed photo on the desk, Claire and me at our rehearsal dinner, her head tipped back laughing, me looking at her like she'd invented sunlight, and something went very quiet inside me. Not the dramatic, crashing quiet of a movie. A small quiet. The kind that happens when a sound you've been hearing so long you stopped noticing it suddenly stops. I didn't confront her that night. I know that surprises people when I tell them. They expect me to say I marched downstairs and demanded answers, that I threw something or slammed a door. But I've always been the kind of man who needed to understand the shape of a thing before I touched it. My father was like that. He used to say you don't pick up something that might be broken until you know where the cracks are, or you'll just cut yourself and lose the pieces. So instead I waited until Claire left for her Saturday yoga class, the one that ran 90 minutes, the one she'd been attending religiously for the past 2 years, and I sat down with her phone. She hadn't changed her passcode since we got married. I'd watched her type it 100 times without thinking about it. 6 digits, our anniversary, May 18th, 051813. The voicemails were in a third-party app one didn't recognize, something called Vault Call that looked like a calculator on the surface. 11 saved messages, all from a contact listed only as R. The earliest was dated 16 months ago. 3 weeks before she deleted the wedding video. I didn't listen to all of them that morning. I listened to the first one and the last one, and that was enough. The first one, a man's voice, low and easy, the kind of voice that assumed it was welcome wherever it landed. Hey, you. Just thinking about you. Call me when he's asleep. He. That word like a small blade. The last one, dated 11 days ago, I know things are complicated right now, but I meant what I said. You deserve better than a man who doesn't see you. You know where I am. I sat there for a long time with Claire's phone in my hands and our house around me, the house we'd bought together 4 years ago, the house I'd put the down payment on for my savings, the house where my name was first on the deed and her name was second because that's how the lawyer had drawn it up, and neither of us had thought twice about it, and I thought about the word complicated. I thought about all the things that had been complicated that I hadn't known about. I thought about the yoga class. I thought about the birthday dinner 3 weeks ago, the one where Claire had excused herself to take a phone call and come back to the table looking flushed and soft in a way I'd mistaken for wine. I put her phone exactly where I'd found it. I went upstairs and I stood in the shower for 20 minutes. And then I called my brother, Daniel. Daniel is 4 years older than me and works in family law. I didn't tell him everything that morning. I was still sorting it into piles, the way you do with something too big to carry all at once, but I told him enough. I told him about the video and the voicemails. I told him about R. Daniel listened without interrupting, which is rare for him, and when I finished he said, "Don't touch anything. Don't move money. Don't say anything to her yet. Come to my office Monday morning and bring what you have." "I don't have recordings," I said. "I only listened." I didn't. "That's fine," Daniel said. "Just come Monday." I went back downstairs. I made coffee. When Claire came home from yoga with her hair damp and her cheeks pink, she kissed me on the cheek and asked what I wanted for lunch, and I said whatever you're making sounds good, and I watched her move around our kitchen like she belonged there, like everything was exactly what it appeared to be, and I smiled at her and I felt the ground underneath me go completely hollow. The reunion was Claire's idea. Her college roommate, a woman named Patrice, organized it every 2 years, a long weekend at a rented lake house in North Carolina with about 30 people from their graduating class. Claire had gone to every one since I'd known her. I'd gone to the last two as her husband, standing at the edge of clusters of people who'd known each other for 15 years, nursing a beer and being gracious about it because it mattered to her. This year's was scheduled for the last weekend in April. 6 weeks after I found the voicemails. By then I knew considerably more. Daniel's paralegal, a methodical woman named Beverly who had clearly seen every variety of marital collapse, helped me understand what I was looking at. The man's name, the owner of the Easy Voice, the man who thought I was just someone who went to sleep, was Ryan Calloway. He and Claire had met at a professional conference 18 months ago. He lived 40 minutes away, in Augusta. He was, according to his LinkedIn profile and the various other breadcrumbs Beverly helped me follow without touching anything that would alert anyone, a sales director for a medical device company. He was also, as of 14 months ago, divorced, which coincided, I noticed, with the deletion of my wedding video. She'd made room. That was what I kept coming back to. She hadn't just hidden something from me. She'd made room, the way you clear a shelf before you put something new on it. I went to Daniel's office 4 times in 6 weeks. I signed papers I understood and papers I had to have explained to me twice. I moved money carefully and legally, with Daniel's guidance, shifting my personal investments, the ones I'd held before we married and that were documented as such, into an account in my name only. I cataloged every asset. I had the house appraised quietly, by a firm in a different county. And I did one more thing, the thing Daniel had mentioned almost as an aside in our second meeting, the thing that turned out to matter most. I contacted the county recorder's office and, after considerable paperwork and a filing fee and one notarized document that made my hand shake slightly as I signed it, I initiated the process to remove Claire's name from the deed. It wasn't finalized yet when we left for the reunion. But it was filed. It was in motion. And Claire didn't know any of it. The lake house was large and loud and smelled like cedar and someone's aggressive scented candles. Patrice greeted us at the door with a glass of wine for Claire and a handshake for me, and I smiled at her and carried our bags to the room we'd been assigned, and I unpacked my half of the suitcase with the careful movements of a man who knew exactly how long he intended to stay. The first night was a dinner party that spread across 2 tables pushed together on the screened porch, 30 people talking over each other with the comfortable chaos of people who'd been doing this for years. I sat beside Claire and across from a couple whose names I learned and immediately stored away, and I ate the food and laughed at the right moments and refilled Claire's wine glass when it got low, and I was, I believe, entirely convincing. What I was watching, the whole time, was Claire's phone. She kept it face down on the table beside her plate, which she'd never done at dinner before. Or maybe she had, and I'd never noticed, because I'd had no reason to notice. I noticed now. I noticed every time she glanced at it. I noticed the particular quality of her attention when it buzzed, the way she would touch it briefly with 2 fingers and then pull her hand back. The second morning, I went for a run. I took the long route around the lake, 5 miles in the early April cool, and I thought about my father, who taught me to fish in a lake not unlike this one, who told me once that the hardest part of doing the right thing is that nobody hands you a clear signal for when it's time to start. You have to decide that yourself, he said. You have to pick the moment. When I got back, Claire was sitting on the porch with Patrice and 3 other women, coffee in hand, laughing. She looked beautiful in the morning light. She looked like someone who had no idea that her husband had run 5 miles around a lake deciding when to pick his moment. She didn't know that the moment was already tonight. Saturday evening. Patrice had set up a Bluetooth speaker situation on the back deck and opened 4 bottles of wine, and the 30 people had organized themselves into the loose, shifting clusters of a party that wasn't really a party, just people who liked each other and had enough history to fill an evening. Fairy lights. The smell of the lake coming up through the trees. Someone had made a bonfire in the pit down by the water. I was standing near the drink table talking to a man named Gordon who taught high school history and had opinions about documentary filmmaking that I was genuinely interested in, and Claire was across the deck with Patrice and 2 other women, and she had her phone out. She had her phone out and she was smiling at it the way she hadn't smiled at me in longer than I wanted to calculate, and I watched her type something and then hold the phone close to her chest for a moment before she slipped it into the pocket of her cardigan. Then Patrice said something and all 4 of them leaned in together, the intimate geometry of women sharing a secret, and Claire was laughing, and then she said something I couldn't hear, but I could see her mouth, and I could see Patrice's expression shift into something that wasn't quite laughter anymore, something more complicated, and Patrice glanced across the deck toward me quickly, one quick look, the kind that means someone's name just got said, and looked away. I smiled at Gordon and excused myself and went inside to use the bathroom. I took the long way, through the kitchen, where a woman named Becca was putting out more cheese, and she stopped me to ask how Claire and I were doing, how married life was, the cheerful blunt questions of someone 3 glasses of wine into a good evening, and I told her we were good, just great, and she said Claire was so lucky, and I said I was the lucky one, and I meant both things and neither thing simultaneously, and I walked down the hall toward the bathroom. The hallway connected to the screened side porch. The door to the side porch was ajar. Claire's voice came through it clearly. She was standing maybe 8 feet from the door, facing the railing, phone to her ear. Her voice had the low, careful quality of someone who believed they were out of earshot. I know. 2 more days and I'm home. A pause. I miss you too. Another pause, longer. He's fine. He's inside talking to someone. He doesn't notice anything. I stood in the hallway. The cheese knife Becca was using made small sounds in the kitchen behind me. Someone on the deck laughed at something Gordon said. I can't keep doing this halfway, Claire said. I know what I want. I've known for a while. A pause. I don't know. He's a good person. He'll be fine. He's always fine. He's got his job and his brother and he'll land on his feet, he always does. She laughed a little, quiet and private. He's my backup plan that worked out better than expected, and that's not enough to build a life on, you know. Backup plan. I stood very still in that hallway and I let it move through me, that phrase, like cold water, and I thought about May 18, 2013, when Claire had cried during our vows real tears. I'd been certain they were real and I'd thought, this is the beginning of everything. I thought about 4 years in this house. I thought about the mortgage we carried together and the dinners we cooked and the way she always put her cold feet against my legs in bed in the winter. I thought about how I'd gone looking for a video of her laughing because I wanted to give something beautiful to her sick mother. And I thought about the document filed with the county recorder's office. The one that was still processing. The one that, as of 48 hours ago, had not yet been finalized. I pulled out my phone. I opened my email. I had Daniel's personal cell memorized. Then I heard Patrice's voice from somewhere nearby on the deck. Claire. You in here? And Claire said a quick goodbye into her phone and came back through the screen door and nearly walked into me. She stopped. Her face did something complicated and fast, a series of small adjustments, ending at a smile. Hey, babe. I heard you, I said. Not loud. Not angry. I want to be precise about this, I was not performing calm for her benefit. The rage was there, but it was underneath a layer of something even colder, which was certainty. I had known, for 6 weeks, that this moment was coming. I had prepared for it. And now that it was here, I found that I didn't want to yell. I didn't want to make a scene in Patrice's rented lake house hallway. What I wanted was for her to understand that I had heard her. Completely. For once. Claire's smile fell. Jacob. I heard everything, I said. Don't. It's not. Don't, I said again. Please. She looked at me for a long moment, and I watched her cycle through the options: denial, explanation, counterattack, and then something in her face settled into something I recognized as the truth, which was that she had run out of directions to run. I'm going to go back out to the party, I said. I'm going to say goodbye to Gordon because I like Gordon. And then I'm going to get our bags and put them in the car, and then I'm going to come find you and tell you I'm leaving. And you can come with me or you can stay, but either way, I'm going. You can't just. Backup plan, I said. Her mouth closed. I walked back down the hallway and out onto the deck. The ferry lights were warm and the bonfire down at the water was still going, and Gordon was now in an animated conversation with 2 other people about something that had him gesturing with both hands. I went and joined them for 15 minutes. I laughed at the right parts. I refilled my drink once and didn't finish it. Then I went upstairs and I packed our bags in 7 minutes. I was always better at packing than Claire. I came back to the deck. Claire was standing near the fire pit table, apart from the group, watching for me. She'd been crying quietly, recently, not enough for anyone else to notice. I walked to her and I looked at her and I said, clearly enough that Patrice, standing 3 feet away, turned her head, I'm leaving. You have a ride if you want it. Patrice said, Jacob. Have a good rest of the weekend, I told her, and I meant it, because Patrice had nothing to do with any of this. Then I walked through the house and out the front door and down the steps to the driveway, and I put our bags in the trunk and I got in the car and I sat there. Claire came out 4 minutes later. She got in the passenger seat and didn't say anything, and I drove the first hour in silence, the mountains going dark around us, and that was the last night we ever spent in the same house. She thought I didn't know about Ryan Calloway until 3 days after we got home, when I finally said his name out loud. We'd been existing in the same space with the careful avoidance of people navigating around something broken on the floor. Claire sleeping in the guest room, her idea, or mine. I'd suggested it so levelly that she hadn't argued. Me making coffee in the morning as I always had. The 2 of us moving around each other with the strange courtesy of people who haven't yet decided what they're allowed to be angry about. On the 3rd morning I put a coffee in front of her and I sat down across the kitchen table and I said, I know about Ryan Calloway. She went white. I know about Vault Call, I said. I know about the conference in Charlotte 18 months ago. I know that you deleted our wedding video before Pete could stop you, which means you'd already decided something by then. I kept my voice level. I know that you've been spending Saturday mornings with him instead of at yoga. Jacob, How long were you going to let this go on? She cried. Real tears, or tears that looked real, and I sat there and felt the deep, oceanic tiredness of a man who has already done his grieving in private and come out the other side. I had cried. 6 weeks ago, alone in my car in the parking garage at work, I had sat there for 20 minutes and wept in a way I hadn't since my father's funeral, and then I had driven home and made dinner and smiled at my wife, and nobody had known, and now I was done. I'm sorry, she said. Jacob, I'm so sorry, I didn't know how to. You had 18 months, I said. You had 18 months to figure out how to tell me, or to end it, or to come to me and say something is wrong. You had 18 months and you spent them deleting evidence and lying to my face and deciding that I was someone who would be fine. She flinched at that last word. Good. My brother will be handling things on my end, I said. You'll need to get a lawyer. Jacob, please, can we talk about this? Can we try? No, I said. Not angry. Just clear. I picked up my coffee and took it to my office and closed the door, and I called Daniel and told him it was time to begin in earnest. That afternoon a process server rang our doorbell and Claire received the first of what would turn out to be several legal documents. The house situation became clear to her about 2 weeks later. I'd expected, honestly, an explosion. I'd thought the deed would be the thing that broke the careful surface of our ongoing practical dismantlement. Instead she called me, which meant she'd moved temporarily to her sister's house in Colombia, and she said in a strange, flat voice, "You filed on the deed." I did, I said. When? 6 weeks ago. A long silence. You knew 6 weeks ago. I did. And you didn't say anything. You came to the reunion. You drove me there. You asked me to come, I said. So I came. Another silence. The deed isn't you can't just remove me. I'm entitled to. Daniel says otherwise, I said. The down payment was documented as my separate property. We've never refinanced. There's a paper trail that's pretty clear. You're welcome to have your lawyer look at it. Her lawyer did look at it. Daniel had been thorough. She kept saying she was sorry. Every time we spoke, which became, over the following weeks, less often and then only through Daniel and her lawyer, a woman named Kim who was decent and didn't try to make things uglier than they already were, the word sorry came up. I believed her, in the abstract, limited way you believe someone who is sorry they got caught. Ryan Calloway, for whatever it's worth, did not survive the discovery process with his pride intact. His name came up in the depositions. Claire had to disclose the relationship. Kim had advised her to be truthful and she was, mostly, in the efficient and minimal way of someone protecting what they can. Ryan Calloway learned, through the particular grapevine of a medium-sized professional world, that he'd been named in a divorce proceeding. His employer, a conservative medical device company with a conduct clause in its senior staff contracts, learned the same way. He resigned before they could act on it, but the result was the same. I didn't orchestrate that. I want to be clear about that, not for Claire's sake, but for mine. I didn't make any calls or send any emails. I just let the legal process proceed, and the legal process is not a quiet thing, and information moves the way information moves. I watched it happen from a distance with the detached interest of someone observing a consequence they did not personally engineer but had absolutely anticipated. The divorce took 7 months. Georgia being what it is, there was a waiting period and paperwork and Kim and Daniel going back and forth over numbers that represented 4 years of a shared life broken down into columns. I was not punitive about it. I did not want to be punitive. I wanted it to be finished, and punitive was slow. Claire got a settlement that was fair. She got her car and her personal accounts and a portion of what we'd saved together during the marriage. She did not get the house. The deed, by the time the divorce was finalized, had been fully updated. The house was mine alone, which was only what it had been before she ever moved into it. I had dinner with her mother, Diane, once, 3 months into the process. Diane was sick and she loved her daughter, and she also, I believe, knew her daughter, and the dinner was one of the more honest and painful conversations I have had as an adult. Diane held my hand across the table and said, "You deserved better than this. I want you to know that I know that." I told her I knew she did. I meant it. Diane passed away 5 months later, before the divorce was finalized, and I sent flowers to the service and did not attend because it wasn't my place anymore, but I thought about her, and I thought about the clip I'd never been able to find. I'm going to tell you something about the months after, because I think people expect a certain kind of story: the furious rebuilding, the montage of achievement, the aggressive glow-up performed partly for the audience of an ex-wife who needs to see what she lost. That's not what happened for me. What happened was quieter and stranger and, in the end, more mine. I kept the house. I painted 2 rooms I'd always wanted to paint differently. I got a dog, a 3-year-old mutt named Cobb that the rescue place described as medium energy, which turned out to mean he wanted to run 4 miles every morning and then sleep on my feet for the rest of the day. He was, from the first week, the best decision I'd made in years. I went back to playing guitar, something I'd put down 7 or 8 years ago for no good reason, and I joined a loose collection of people who met on Thursday evenings at a bar in the neighborhood to play for each other and nobody else. I wasn't good. I got less bad, slowly, which is its own satisfaction. At work, I was offered a promotion I'd been angling toward for 2 years: regional director, overseeing 4 offices instead of 1, and I took it, and I was good at it, and the raise was significant, and I noticed that I had stopped instinctively calculating what things would mean for us, and that the single-column budget was easier to manage and less interesting to think about, which turned out to be something I found clarifying rather than lonely. I went to therapy. Every Thursday morning, before work, before guitar in the evenings, I sat in a chair across from a man named Dr. Alton who asked questions without answering them and let me talk myself into understanding things. We talked about the 6 weeks of silence, why I hadn't confronted Claire immediately, and what I came to understand was that it hadn't been cowardice. It had been, in some old and instinctive way, self-protection. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I could grieve it, because I'd known, on some level, that the grieving would be enormous, and I had needed to be standing on solid ground first. I was right about the grieving. It was enormous. It arrived in pieces, over months, in the unpredictable way of grief: once in the grocery store in front of a display of a brand of crackers she'd always bought, once during a Thursday guitar session when someone played a chord progression that sounded like the first song we danced to at our wedding, once on a perfectly ordinary Wednesday morning when Cobb put his head in my lap and I thought, with sudden and complete clarity, I would have done anything for her. And I cried, and then Cobb looked at me with the profound pragmatic patience of a good dog, and I took him outside and we ran 4 miles and came home, and I made eggs, and I went to work. 16 months after the divorce was finalized, I saw Claire. I didn't plan it. I'd driven down to Augusta for a work thing, a meeting with one of our satellite offices, and afterward I'd stopped at a restaurant near the highway that Daniel had recommended, a barbecue place with a parking lot full of pickup trucks and a line out the door on weeknights. I was waiting for a table at the bar when I looked up and she was there. She was with a woman I didn't recognize, a friend, sitting at a high table by the window. She saw me at the same moment I saw her, and for a moment neither of us moved. She looked tired. Not devastated, not broken, just tired, in the particular way of someone who has been managing something difficult for a long time. Her hair was shorter. She was wearing a jacket I didn't recognize. She looked like herself and also like someone I had once known well and now knew only in the way you know the shape of a place you used to live. She said something to her friend and came over. I stood up from the bar stool because my father had taught me to, which is the kind of reflex that survives everything. "Jacob," she said. "Claire." She looked at me, really looked, the way people do when they're trying to take an inventory, and she said, "You look well." "I am," I said. "You." She shook her head slightly. Not dishonestly. Just accurately. "Getting there," she said. We stood there for a moment with the barbecue place noise around us. I didn't feel anger. I want to be precise about this too, the way I was precise about the night at the lake house. I didn't feel anger, or satisfaction, or tenderness, or loss. I felt the calm, clear knowledge of someone who has been through a thing and come out the other side with no illusions remaining. I felt like myself. "I heard about your promotion," she said. "Congratulations. You deserved it." "Thank you," I said. Another moment. "Ryan and I," she started, and then stopped. "You don't have to," I said. "I know." She looked at her hands briefly. "I know I don't. I wanted to say that I know what I did to you. I think about it." She looked up. "I deleted our wedding video because I was trying to make it easier to leave and I was too much of a coward to actually leave. And I told myself you'd be fine, that you were always fine, and that was," she stopped again. "That wasn't about you. That was about me needing to make it okay in my head." I nodded. I'd known that, more or less. Dr. Alton and I had talked about it. "I'm sorry, Jacob," she said. "Genuinely." "I know," I said. "I believe you." She nodded once, and she looked at me for a moment longer with an expression I couldn't quite name. Not regret, exactly, more like the recognition of a distance that has become permanent, and then she said, "Take care of yourself," and went back to her table. My table was called 5 minutes later. I sat down and ordered the brisket and ate it alone, which I have become genuinely good at, and I thought about the fact that the conversation had been, in the end, simply two adults who'd hurt each other and healed, acknowledging the existence of the damage without reopening it. It had been, I realized, the cleanest version of the ending I could have hoped for. When I got home that night it was late, past 9, and Cobb met me at the door with the full-body enthusiasm of a dog who considers a 4-hour absence a genuine emergency. I took him out and we walked around the block in the spring dark and I looked at the house, my house, the one I'd saved for, the one I'd bought and painted and lived in and survived, and the lights were on in the 2 rooms I'd repainted, warm yellow through the windows, and it looked like a place where someone lived their actual life. Inside, I fed Cobb and poured a glass of whiskey and sat on the porch in the dark for a while. I thought about something Daniel had said to me, early on, when I was still in the stage of mostly sitting in his office looking at documents while trying to keep my face composed. He'd said, "The hardest thing about all of this is going to be remembering that you didn't do anything wrong. Not a single thing. And it'll be tempting to find something, some way you failed, something you should have seen. Don't go looking for it. You were a good husband to someone who had already decided not to be a good wife. That's the whole story." I'd thought about that a lot, over the months. I'd turned it over the way you turn a stone in your hand, checking it from every angle. And I'd arrived, slowly and without fanfare, at the conclusion that Daniel was right. I hadn't been a perfect husband, I'd been distracted sometimes, absent-minded, better at big gestures than small attentions, but I had been faithful and honest and present, and I had loved her in the complete and earnest way that I'd promised to, and none of that had been a mistake. It had been what I had to offer, and I had offered it genuinely, and she had taken it and made choices I couldn't control, and I was done accounting for her choices. Cobb came and put his chin on my knee and I scratched his ears in the dark. I had the house. I had the dog. I had Thursday evenings with bad guitar players getting less bad together. I had a job that asked more of me than I'd expected and a salary that reflected it. I had Daniel, who'd called me every week for 7 months without being asked. I had Dr. Alton and his patient questions. I had 4 miles every morning in the early light, just Cobb and me and the neighborhood waking up around us. I understood, exactly the life I'd rebuilt for myself out of the rubble of one that hadn't been what it appeared. I'd built it plank by plank, carefully, the way my father had taught me, understand the thing before you touch it. Know where the cracks are. I heard, through people who had known us both, that Ryan Calloway had moved to Atlanta and was doing something in sales, which was what he'd always done. I heard that he and Claire were no longer together, which surprised me less than it might have once. Some things are built for the specific conditions of being secret, and when the secret goes, the thing goes with it. I didn't think about Claire the way I once had. The grief had run its full course through me and come out clean on the other side, the way rivers do. There was no bitterness left that I could locate, and I'd looked. What there was, instead, was a kind of raw and complete clarity about who I was and what I valued and what I would not accept, a clarity I hadn't had at 32 when I married her and had now, at 38, in my bones. The night was warm and the whiskey was good and Cobb was half asleep against my leg. Somewhere in the neighborhood a dog was barking at something it couldn't name, the way dogs do, raising the alarm about the darkness just in case. I finished my drink. I went inside. I locked the door of my house behind me, my door, my lock, my house, the deed filed cleanly in my name, and I went to bed, and I slept without dreaming, and in the morning Cobb woke me before the alarm and we ran our 4 miles in the early light, and the day was fine.